Karen has full meltdown at airport over bag fee, misses her flight mid-rant. The domestic terminal buzzed with an almost electric kind of chaos, the kind only winter holiday travel could generate. A sea of overstuffed coats, clunky boots, crying bobbies, and frenzied voices echoed under the fluorescent lights of Terminal C. The flight departure boards blinked steadily, warning of weather delays and last-minute gate changes. But amid the hustle, one woman strutted forward with the self-importance of a queen. Karen. She marched up to the budget airline's check-in counter with a sense of entitlement so thick it seemed to push aside the travelers waiting patiently behind her. Wrapped in a tan faux fur coat, sunglasses perched atop her highlighted hair despite the overcast morning, she yanked her leopard print roller bag up to the counter and immediately began tapping long acrylic nails on the desk. She didn't wait to be acknowledged. "Yeah, hi," she said, her tone already dripping with irritation. "I need to check in for Flight 1423 to Miami, and no, I'm not paying extra for my carry-on. I've flown with you people before." The airline representative, a young woman named Tasha who had clearly already endured more than her fair share of entitled passengers that morning, offered a patient smile. "Welcome, ma'am. May I see your ID and boarding pass, please?" she asked politely, her voice soft yet efficient. She glanced at Karen's luggage with the experienced eye of someone who knew this conversation all too well. The bag was clearly over the size limit for carry-ons, even at a glance. Karen rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder she didn't strain something. "Yeah, sure, whatever." She shoved her phone forward, flashing the boarding pass screen. Tasha scanned it quickly and then gestured toward the roller bag. "I'm afraid that bag exceeds our carry-on size limit, ma'am. There's a $40 fee to check it." The words hung in the air like a slap. Karen blinked, leaned forward, and said with an exaggerated pause between each word, "You have got to be kidding me." She scoffed, then took a dramatic step back as though she'd just been told she was under arrest. "This is highway robbery. I've flown this exact route with this exact airline 3 times this year, and I've never paid for a carry-on." "I understand your frustration, ma'am," Tasha replied calmly, though her hands gripped the edge of the desk just a little tighter. "But the policy applies to all passengers. The bag doesn't fit in our size checker and it needs to be checked. That will be a $40 fee." Karen wasn't listening. Instead, she spun around theatrically, addressing the line of travelers behind her. "Can you believe this? They're trying to scam me. $40 for a bag that fits in an overhead compartment. I could have flown first class for that kind of money." Behind her, a few tired eyes rolled in silent disapproval. A man holding a toddler exchanged a knowing glance with his wife. A college student with a guitar case mumbled something under his breath, but nobody said anything aloud. Yet, they'd all been in this situation before. One person clogging the entire flow of airport progress with righteous indignation and complete disregard for anyone else's time. Karen turned back to Tasha. "I demand to speak to a manager. This is unacceptable. I'm not paying a dime more than I already have. What kind of bait-and-switch operation are you people running here?" Tasha, to her credit, kept her professional mask firmly in place. "I can call my supervisor for you, ma'am, but they will tell you the same policy. It's printed on your boarding pass and was included when you purchased your ticket." Karen crossed her arms and stood her ground like she was preparing for battle. "Call them. I'm not moving from this spot until someone with actual authority tells me why they think they can steal from hardworking Americans." Her voice was rising, growing louder with every syllable. Nearby passengers began glancing toward the noise, curious or annoyed. A few feet away, another airline representative discreetly picked up a phone to summon a supervisor while Tasha tried once more to keep things from spiraling. "Ma'am, I want to help you, but we do need to keep the line moving. We can take care of your bag fee quickly and get you to your gate on time." Karen interrupted with a sharp laugh. "Oh, now you're worried about time. Maybe you should have thought about that before you tried to rip me off." She slammed her palm on the counter, making several people flinch. "I know my rights. I've read the travel laws. This is a violation of consumer protection. I'll have my lawyer on the phone before your shift ends." "Ma'am, there's no need to threaten legal action," Tasha said evenly, though the tightness in her voice was beginning to show. "We're just enforcing the airline's published baggage policy." Karen began rummaging through her handbag, pulling out random receipts, brochures, and even an expired driver's license in a futile attempt to find something, anything, that might support her claim. "I have proof, somewhere here. You people are going to regret this." The line behind her was now 15 passengers deep. A mother with 2 crying toddlers tried to shush them while shifting her weight from one leg to the other. A young man in a neck pillow checked his phone anxiously. A family of 4 was glancing nervously at the departure screen, where their gate number flashed in bold letters. Time was ticking, but Karen was immovable. "Ma'am," came a new voice. A tall man in a navy blazer and airline badge stepped forward. He looked tired but calm. "I'm the on-duty supervisor. I understand you have a concern about the baggage fee." Karen lit up like a Christmas tree. "Finally, someone in charge. Yes, your staff is trying to charge me $40 for a carry-on bag that fits. I fly this route all the time and I've never paid before. This is unacceptable." The supervisor glanced at the bag and gave a tiny nod. "That bag is clearly too large for the cabin. It exceeds our carry-on limits by at least 4 inches. Our system flags these at check-in. The $40 fee is standard and applies to all passengers. Unfortunately, we can't make an exception." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "I want your name," she hissed. "You'll be hearing from my attorney. This is discrimination. You just lost a loyal customer." The supervisor didn't even flinch. "You're free to decline the fee, ma'am, but we won't be able to issue a boarding pass until it's resolved. The flight begins boarding in 20 minutes. That made Karen pause, but only for a moment. "Oh, I'm not done with this. I have over 10,000 followers online. You people are going to be famous," she snapped, raising her phone and hitting the record button. "Say hello to the internet. I'm documenting this." Tasha took a discreet step back as Karen turned the phone toward her, launching into a dramatic retelling of her mistreatment, while the crowd behind her watched in simmering silence. The show had only just begun. Karen's voice echoed through the terminal as if she were performing a one-woman stage play in the middle of a holiday travel nightmare. Her phone was clutched tightly in one hand, held vertically as she ranted directly into the camera, framing herself as the victim of what she loudly called corporate greed and traveler discrimination. Behind her, the line of delayed, exhausted, and increasingly irritated passengers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging long-suffering glances and silent groans. No one dared interrupt her tirade, at least not yet, but the tension in the air was starting to hum with barely contained frustration. Her phone camera wobbled as she turned it to Tasha, who, by now, had adopted the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had been through this before and was mentally floating far away from the chaos unraveling in front of her. Karen's voice rose a notch, calling the airline's behavior un-American and illegal, insisting that she would sue for emotional damages caused by intentional stress and humiliation. Tasha stepped back and let the supervisor handle it. He had dealt with these confrontations before and carried the resigned calm of a man who knew there was no winning, only surviving. He spoke slowly and clearly, reiterating for the 3rd time that all passengers were subject to the same baggage policy and that the oversized carry-on had to be checked for a $40 fee. Karen responded by switching tactics. She now claimed she was being singled out because of her social media presence, which she inflated in real time, claiming, "I have nearly 1 million followers and this entire thing is going to be public. Do you hear me? You're going to be famous for the wrong reasons. My community does not tolerate this kind of disrespect." She panned the camera over the counter again, this time pointing it at the airline's logo like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom trial. "Everyone watching this, remember their name. Never fly this airline again. They treat people like dirt." The supervisor, unfazed, gave her a small nod and said, "You are welcome to record, ma'am, but we do need to keep the line moving. You've been at the counter for over 10 minutes and we still have passengers to assist." That only made Karen more belligerent. "Oh, so now I'm a problem. I'm holding you up. No, no, don't twist this around. You are the problem. This whole system is broken, and I'm the only one here brave enough to say it." She turned the camera back on herself, changing her tone to performative sorrow. "I just wanted to get home for Christmas. I wanted to see my family and spend the holidays in peace. And now I'm being harassed, penalized, and publicly shamed. For what? A bag that's 2 inches too wide. Where's the compassion? Where's the humanity?" The crowd behind her was no longer silently suffering. A few audible sighs escaped. A woman in a red coat near the back muttered, "Oh my God, just pay the stupid $40, loud enough for a few nearby people to nod in agreement. A man holding a sleeping toddler shuffled forward and cleared his throat, clearly fed up. "Excuse me," he said, with carefully restrained patience. "I hate to interrupt, but we've been standing here for a long time and some of us have flights boarding soon. Could you maybe take this up with someone privately?" Karen turned, eyes wide with disbelief, as though no one had the right to challenge her. "Oh, so now you're taking their side," she snapped. "Are you kidding me? I'm doing you a favor, standing up for all of us being nickel and dimed by airlines that don't care about customers. You should be thanking me." The man's wife, visibly tired and holding a diaper bag, stepped forward too. "We have a connection to make. Can you please let the line move? You're holding everyone up." Karen's expression hardened. "Don't talk to me about being held up. If your flight matters so much, maybe you should have gotten here earlier," she retorted, the kind of snide, unnecessary comment that made the crowd audibly gasp. It was as if Karen was unaware, or simply didn't care, that she had already crossed several invisible lines of decency. She was too far into her performance now, too invested in the story she was spinning for her phone's camera, and the imagined millions of viewers who would rally behind her righteous crusade. Security, who had been quietly observing from a few feet away, finally stepped in. A tall female officer approached slowly, hands visible and tone neutral. "Ma'am, we need to ask you to either resolve the baggage fee or step aside so the line can continue. You are delaying other passengers from reaching their flights." Karen looked up from her phone, incredulous. "Oh, fantastic. Now you're bringing in security. What am I, a threat? I'm a mother. I'm a small business owner. I pay taxes. I have rights." She moved to put the phone closer to the officer's face, but the officer gently motioned her to lower it. "We are not here to argue with you," she said calmly, "but you've had multiple chances to pay the fee and board your flight. This is now a matter of public disruption." A ripple of approval moved through the crowd, not loud but unmistakable. Some passengers began to quietly applaud. One teenager whispered, "Finally," as she pulled her earbuds out to watch. Karen noticed. Her jaw tensed. Her eyes darted around, scanning the sea of faces, but there was no sympathy. She was alone now, with nothing but her indignation and her camera, which she had stopped recording somewhere during the confrontation. Her fingers twitched toward the zipper on her wallet but hesitated. Paying now would mean defeat. It would mean surrendering the fantasy that she was the hero in this story. So she did what any committed character in denial would do. She doubled down. Karen pointed a long nail toward the desk. "I demand written proof that this is your policy. I want to see the regulation, the clause, the fine print. Show me, in writing, where it says you can just spring fees on people without warning. And no, I won't look it up on your website. I want a physical copy now." The supervisor sighed but complied, stepping into the back to retrieve the printed customer policy brochure. As he disappeared behind the counter, Tasha looked to the passengers and said, "I apologize for the delay. We'll help you all as quickly as we can." But it was clear this situation wasn't ending anytime soon. Karen, victorious in her mind for delaying the inevitable, stood her ground and crossed her arms again. The screen behind her now showed her flight's boarding status changing from on time to boarding. Karen didn't notice. She was too focused on getting the last word. The terminal buzzed on. oblivious to the miniature war still playing out at the budget airline's check-in counter. While families rushed past, hauling children and suitcases toward distant gates, Karen stood rooted like an angry oak tree in winter, unmoving and unbending. Her arms were crossed so tightly across her chest, it looked as though she were trying to physically hold in the fury radiating off her body. The supervisor returned from the back office carrying a laminated sheet that listed the airline's baggage policy in plain, bold text, the kind meant to eliminate confusion. He placed it gently on the counter and pointed to the highlighted section that stated any bag exceeding the designated cabin size was subject to a $40 carry-on fee. "Here it is, ma'am," he said, calmly but firmly. "This is the policy that applies to all passengers, regardless of travel frequency or destination." Karen didn't even glance at the sheet. Her eyes remained locked on the supervisor's face as though the paper were an insult, an act of hostility she refused to dignify. "I don't care what your little flyer says," she snapped, her voice clipped with venom. "You can print anything you want and call it a policy. That doesn't make it legal." She jabbed a finger toward the desk, then looked around again, hoping someone, anyone, would leap to her defense. But the crowd had long since turned from passive observers into silent opponents. A few people shook their heads, others stared with open disdain, and a woman scrolling her phone muttered, "Still at it," under her breath. No one was on her side anymore if they ever were to begin with. The flight departure screen updated again behind her, but she remained unaware. It now read, "Final boarding call, Gate 12, Flight 1423 to Miami." The countdown had started, though the only clock Karen was concerned with was the one in her head, ticking louder with every moment she refused to admit she was wrong. The supervisor, seeing there was no reasoning with her, offered one last attempt to de-escalate the situation. "Ma'am, we are now minutes away from closing the gate. If you want to make your flight, I recommend paying the fee and proceeding to security immediately." For a brief, flickering moment, Karen's confident posture wavered. Her eyes darted to the departure screen, and for the first time she seemed to process that her time was running out. But the moment passed, and with it, any chance of her backing down gracefully. "This is extortion," she said, louder now, making sure the entire terminal heard her. "You're threatening to make me miss my flight if I don't pay an unjust fee. That's coercion. That's illegal. I know the law." She turned to the security officer, hopping for backup. "Are you just going to let them do this to me? Isn't there a travel ombudsman or someone who can stop this?" The officer remained professional but detached. "Ma'am, I'm only here to ensure everyone's safety. This is a customer service matter. If you'd like to file a complaint, there's a formal process online or through the airport help desk." Karen scoffed so hard it nearly echoed. "A formal complaint? Are you serious? By the time anyone reads that, Christmas will be over and I'll be stuck in this frozen hellhole with you people. I am not paying. I will not pay." By now, the line had nearly tripled in length. The airline had opened an adjacent counter to try to move people along, and still, Karen's presence managed to clog the flow like a dam in a rushing river. The woman with the red coat from earlier finally stepped forward, her voice firm and sharp as a blade. "This has gone on long enough. Either pay the fee or step aside. You're not the only one trying to get somewhere. You're not special." Karen's face flushed a deep red, the kind of color that only humiliation and rage could create. "Excuse me," she barked, incredulous that anyone would dare speak to her with such audacity. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. I have every right to be upset." The red-coated woman shook her head. "Everyone here has been through something. It's the holidays. We're all tired. We're all stressed. But you don't see the rest of us throwing tantrums and holding up hundreds of people over a rule that's been in place for years. You're not fighting injustice. You're just being selfish." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a garbled voice came over the intercom. "Final call for Flight 1423 to Miami, departing from Gate 12. All remaining passengers must proceed immediately to boarding." The crowd collectively turned toward the gate, a subtle shift of energy rippling through them. Some passengers gave up on watching the showdown entirely and took off running, desperate to make it in time. Others whispered quietly among themselves, shaking their heads and sharing knowing looks. Karen froze. The reality began to sink in. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She turned toward the gate area where the final handful of passengers were being ushered through. She looked back at the supervisor, then at Tasha, then at her bag, her precious leopard print bag that had triggered this entire disaster. "No," she said quietly at first, then louder, as if trying to undo the timeline by sheer force of will. "No, they can't leave without me. I'm checked in. They can't." "I'm sorry, ma'am," the supervisor said, his voice laced with finality. "But you were never issued a boarding pass. You refused to complete the check-in process." Karen surged forward. "No, no, no, this is not happening. You don't get to just leave me here," she shrieked. She grabbed her phone again, fumbling to reopen the camera app as tears of anger pricked the corners of her eyes. Her voice cracked as she began recording once more. They just left me. They let my plane take off. I was right here." Someone in the crowd called out, "You were arguing right here," which sparked a ripple of quiet chuckles. Karen turned in a slow circle, filming everyone as if to catalog the injustice. "Every single one of you saw this," she said, trembling with fury. "They made me miss my flight. They violated my rights. This is not over." But it was. The screen behind her updated once again, replacing final boarding call with the cold, unfeeling word, "Departed." And just like that, the truth landed heavier than any winter storm. Her flight was gone. Her battle was lost. And all she had to show for it was a pointless video, a ruined day, and a bag she still hadn't paid for. She stood motionless, watching the board as if starring hard enough might reverse the decision. The phone in her hand began to tremble, not from tears, but from the jarring realization that, for all her yelling and threatening and posturing, nothing had changed. She hadn't won. No one had caved. The gate had closed and she had lost. And no amount of followers or hashtags would change that now. Karen stood in a stunned silence as the reality of her situation settled heavily over her. The word "departed," glowing ominously above Gate 12 like a verdict carved in stone. The crowd that had once been her reluctant audience began to dissolve, dispersing into smaller groups as people rushed to their gates or simply wanted to get away from the spectacle. The line that had been blocked for nearly an hour now moved rapidly, the relief among the waiting passengers palpable as they shuffled past the check-in desk and murmured to one another, half sympathetic, half amused. Karen, for once, had nothing to say. Her face was frozen in a twisted mix of disbelief and rage, her lips parted just slightly, her eyes wide but unfocused. It was the expression of someone who had spent so long believing the world revolved around her whims that the notion of losing, of being rendered irrelevant in the face of cold, unyielding policy, was simply incomprehensible. The supervisor gave her a final, professional nod and turned away, returning to his duties without another word. Tasha resumed her position at the desk, her expression unreadable but clearly relieved to move on from the exhausting ordeal. Karen stood alone now, isolated not just physically but emotionally. The artificial confidence that had fueled her rant was gone, drained by the brutal indifference of a flight schedule that waited for no one. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her hand still clutched her phone, though the camera app had closed itself. Her luggage sat beside her like a silent co-conspirator, useless now, a leopard print reminder of what this had all been about. Just $40. That was all it would have taken to prevent this. But now it wasn't just about a fee, it was about a spectacle gone wrong. Karen had thrown her tantrum expecting results, not consequences. In her mind, scenes like this always ended with apologies from managers, discounts on future flights, perhaps even a voucher for her inconvenience. That was how it was supposed to go. That was how it had gone in the past. But today, no one had bent. No one had given in. And the world had moved on without her, proving that, despite her volume, she was neither feared nor powerful, just loud. She finally moved, slowly picking up her bag, her limbs stiff as though the act of retreating from this self-made disaster required more energy than the tantrum itself. She began walking away from the counter, head held high but eyes darting nervously from one face to another. Some people looked away, others watched her with thinly veiled smirks. Someone near the coffee kiosk whispered, "That's her," and Karen flinched slightly, the first sign that her confidence was truly cracking. She quickened her pace, wheeling her bag behind her with jerky, frantic movements, looking for a bench or a corner where she could regroup, where no one would stare or laugh or whisper about what they had just witnessed. She found a cold metal bench near a large frosted window overlooking the snowy tarmac. Planes idled in the distance, their lights blinking steadily through the curtain of light snow. Karen collapsed onto the bench, let her bag fall beside her, and let out a long, shaky exhale. She wasn't crying, she refused to cry, but her throat was tight and her fingers trembled as she stared out into the gray, featureless landscape beyond the glass. It wasn't supposed to go like this. She opened her phone and tapped into her video library, rewatching fragments of her recorded tirade with a deep frown. The footage that had felt powerful in the moment now felt exaggerated, even embarrassing. Her voice, once so sure, now sounded shrill. Her indignation came off as petulant. The camera shook with her erratic movements, and worse, the looks on the faces behind her, the passengers she had expected to back her up, told a story she hadn't seen while performing. They weren't nodding in support. They were annoyed, disgusted, some even laughing. She scrolled through her social media and debated uploading the clip. The caption was already in her head: "Airline bullies customer, refuses boarding over scam fee," but something stopped her. If she posted it, she knew what would happen. The comments would not be the sympathy she once expected. The internet was unforgiving, especially to people who couldn't read the room. She'd seen it happen to others, people like her. She thought she was different, but now she wasn't so sure. The risk of becoming a meme, a hashtag, a viral cautionary tale, it hung heavy in her chest. Her screen buzzed. A notification from her airline app reminded her she had missed her flight and offered a rebooking link. She tapped into it, more out of reflex than anything else, and stared at the new options. The next available flight wasn't until late the following day, and thanks to last-minute holiday demand, it was more than double the cost of her original ticket. She had no choice now. She could either book it or stay stranded. And the carry-on fee. It had gone up to $55 for last-minute check-in. She could hardly breathe. After everything, after the argument, the ranting, the humiliation, she would end up paying more than if she had just quietly followed the rules in the first place. She sat there for what felt like an hour, her phone in her lap, her thoughts swirling around like snow in a storm. She considered calling someone, her husband, a friend, maybe even her lawyer, but she knew what they'd say. She knew they ask, "Why didn't you just pay the fee?" And she had no answer that didn't sound childish. Pride, principle, a need to feel powerful in a world that so often left her feeling invisible. None of it mattered now. The truth was simple and devastating. She had been wrong. And in her refusal to admit it, she had cost herself time, money, dignity, and worst of all, control. A teenage girl sat down on the far end of the bench, earbuds in, sipping a coffee, scrolling on her phone. She glanced at Karen once, recognized her, then turned back to her screen. Karen watched as the girl typed something quickly, thumbs flying. A few seconds later, the girl stifled a laugh, shaking her head. Karen didn't need to ask. She knew. The video was out there. Someone else had captured it. The hashtags were probably already trending. She was no longer the storyteller. She had become the story, and not the kind she wanted to be. Karen sat hunched on the metal bench, her shoulders stiff, her eyes fixed on the ground as travelers moved past her in waves, none stopping, none offering sympathy or acknowledgement. She was invisible now in the very place where, an hour ago, she had made herself impossible to ignore. Outside the frosted window beside her, planes continued to taxi along icy runways, their blinking lights vanishing into the gray veil of a wintry sky. The chill from the glass seeped through her coat, a creeping cold that matched the dull ache spreading inside her chest. Her phone sat heavy in her lap, the rebooking screen still open, the new price glaring back at her like an insult she couldn't argue with. She could hear the low hum of announcements overhead, baggage claim information, gate changes, final boarding calls for other destinations, and each one was a reminder of what she'd lost. The flight to Miami was gone. The chance to spend Christmas with her sister and nieces, the dinner she had been planning for weeks, the handmade gifts she'd crammed into her suitcase. All of it had slipped through her fingers because she couldn't let go of $40 and a bruised ego. She opened her messages and scrolled to her sister's name, hesitating as she stared at the blinking cursor. What could she even say? Missed my flight, got into it with the airline staff. Or should she leave out the part where she'd gone viral? Maybe her sister wouldn't notice. Maybe it hadn't spread far, but deep down, Karen knew better. Things like this didn't go away quietly. She had become a performance, a cautionary tale, a 10-second clip wrapped in outrage and served with a side of digital popcorn. She could already imagine the captions. Holiday Karen, bag fee freakout, Gate 12 meltdown. Her own voice echoed in her head, the shrill tone of her threats and accusations replaying involuntarily, each word she had hurled now bouncing back at her with shameful clarity. A notification buzzed. She flinched before glancing at the screen. Someone had tagged her, her heart sank. It was a video, shaky but unmistakable. There she was, front and center, pointing a finger, demanding justice, crying discrimination over a clearly oversized suitcase. The comment section was brutal. Entitled much, "This is why flights get delayed." She missed her flight but found internet fame. She closed the app, cheeks burning, stomach twisting. The worst part wasn't the public humiliation. It was knowing that all of it, the yelling, the threats, the disruption, had accomplished nothing. No policy had changed. No one had apologized. She hadn't won anything. Instead, she had become a joke, a trending punchline in a news cycle hungry for chaos. And the airline, it had simply carried on, indifferent to her fury, like a machine with no time for tantrums. Eventually, she stood, her legs stiff and sore, her bag heavier than before, not from any physical change but from the sheer weight of regret. She made her way slowly toward the main concourse, weaving through streams of travelers who barely glanced at her. The food court loomed ahead, and she found herself drawn to it, more out of instinct than hunger. A warm drink might soothe her nerves, give her a minute to collect her thoughts. She stood in line at a small coffee kiosk, her voice subdued when she finally placed her order. No demands, no condescension, just quiet, defeated civility. The barista didn't recognize her, or if they did, they said nothing. She took her coffee, wrapped her hands around the cup, and walked to a nearby table by herself. As she sipped, her eyes wandered to the families around her, tired parents sharing fries with their kids, a young couple curled up beside their luggage, laughing over something on a tablet. They had all made it. They had paid the fees, followed the rules, boarded their flights. And here she was, stuck in limbo with nothing but scalding coffee and a sinking heart. Across from her, a mother wiped crumbs from her toddler's cheeks while balancing a boarding pass in one hand. Their flight was being called, and the little boy bounced excitedly in his seat. Karen watched them with a pang of longing, not for a child or a specific life, but for the ease with which some people move through the world. No arguing, no grandstanding, just acceptance. She wondered when she had lost that, when everything had become a battle that she felt compelled to win. She used to be different, at least she thought she was. There was a time when she laughed more easily, apologized when she was wrong, let things go without needing to make a scene. But somewhere along the way, she had mistaken stubbornness for strength, noise for power. She pulled her phone out again and reopened the airline app. The rebooking fee still hovered on the screen unchanged. She sighed, tapped continue, and entered her card information. The new flight was for the next evening. There would be no Christmas Eve dinner, no morning presents, no seeing her nieces' faces light up. But she could still get there in time for the second half of the holiday, if only to show up, apologize to her sister, and maybe take a few steps toward being someone she wouldn't mind seeing on camera. As she confirmed the booking, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message from an old friend she hadn't spoken to in months. "Saw you trending, you okay?" The words weren't judgmental, just blunt and honest, and for some reason they hit her harder than the worst of the public comments. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back, "No, but I will be." It was the truth, simple and unfiltered, the first real thing she'd said all day. She sat there a little longer, watching the snow thicken outside, listening to the announcements fade into white noise. Somewhere in the airport, someone else was probably beginning a rant of their own, another voice raised over delays or baggage or some perceived injustice. Karen hoped they would stop before it was too late, before they became a headline, before they lost more than just a flight. Eventually, she stood again, steadier this time. She threw away the empty coffee cup, adjusted the strap on her bag, and walked toward the escalators that led to the lower-level shuttle. She had a hotel reservation to make and a long, quiet night ahead of her. No cameras, no drama, just silence. And for once, she welcomed it.